My husband thought my car crash was just a budgeting problem until I revealed the multi-million-dollar secret hidden in my hospital gown. The screech of the tires was the last sound I remember before the world tilted. It was a sound that always meant trouble, a sound that usually meant Kevin was being reckless on his way home from the bar. This time, however, it wasn't Kevin behind the wheel. It was a late-night pizza delivery guy who'd clearly run the stop sign on Elm Street. I was pulling into our driveway clutching a bag of groceries, mostly cheap wine and instant mac and cheese, the diet of a woman whose husband had just gambled away their last savings on a sure-thing stock tip that went belly up. I remember the paramedics being surprisingly gentle. I remember the searing white light of the emergency room, the constant dull throb where my temple met the dashboard, and then the hushed, grave tones of the doctor explaining the severity of the concussion and the minor spinal trauma. I was fine, mostly. Bruised, concussed, but alive. Kevin arrived 3 hours later, smelling faintly of stale beer and expensive cologne he couldn't afford. He didn't rush to my bedside. He stood by the door, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a suit jacket that looked entirely too crisp for a Tuesday morning visit. "The insurance forms are a nightmare, Sarah," he sighed, running a hand through his already messy, sandy brown hair. "And the hospital bill. We're going to have to dip into the emergency fund just to cover the deductible, even with the good coverage." I was still groggy, the morphine making the hospital room swim. "The emergency fund?" I managed, my voice raspy. "Kevin, that fund was for emergencies. Being hit by a car?" He cut me off with a sharp, dismissive gesture. "This is an emergency, Sarah, a financial one. Look, I'm trying to manage this, okay? You need to focus on getting better. My brother-in-law, Jerry, he's coming over tomorrow to go through the paperwork. He's a CPA now, apparently." Jerry, the man whose financial advice had once involved burying gold coins in the backyard, was now our savior. It was peak Kevin logic. I stared at the ceiling tile, feeling the familiar cold knot of resentment tighten in my chest. For 10 years, I'd played the supportive wife, the cheerful little homemaker who managed the budget, paid the bills, and silently cleaned up the messes left by Kevin's big ideas. The cryptocurrency pyramid scheme, the artisanal dog treat bakery that failed because he forgot to get permits, the time he tried to sell our lawnmower to fund a weekend poker tournament. "Just rest, Sarah," he said again, sounding more bored than concerned. He checked his phone, tapped a few times, and then stuffed it back into his pocket. "I have to get going. I need to go see Marcus about that offshore consulting gig. It's huge, life-changing." He leaned over, gave my forehead a peck that felt more like a formality, and left. I closed my eyes, trying to process the fact that my near-death experience was merely an inconvenient accounting problem for him. The next few days blurred into a cycle of bland food, insistent nurses, and Kevin's increasingly infrequent, increasingly anxious visits. He stopped talking about the consulting gig and started mentioning the lottery. "You know, if I'd only bought that Mega Millions ticket last week," he'd muse, staring out the window. "We wouldn't be worrying about a 5-figure hospital bill, Sarah. We'd be booking a suite in the Maldives right now." He'd always been obsessed with the lottery, spending $20 a week on tickets, treating it like an investment strategy. I always told him it was just a tax on hope. I bought my own tickets, too, but mine were for different drawings, bought from different gas stations, tucked deep into my purse, out of sight. They were my silent protest, my contingency plan against the slow, agonizing suffocation of our shared finances. Then, 2 weeks after the accident, Kevin walked into my hospital room beaming. He wasn't smelling like cologne or stale beer. He smelled like expensive cologne and triumph. "Sarah," he boomed, tossing his jacket onto the visitor's chair with abandon. "You are not going to believe this. It's a miracle, a genuine God-given miracle." He paced the room, bouncing on the balls of his feet. I braced myself. Usually, when Kevin announced a miracle, it meant he'd managed to talk a used car dealer into accepting a slightly deflated Bitcoin as partial payment. "Stop pacing and tell me," I said, trying to sound encouraging, though my head was pounding. He stopped dead in front of the bed, his eyes shining with a terrifying mix of avarice and pure joy. "I won," he whispered, as if the walls had ears. I won the Powerball. $27 million, Sarah. After taxes, it's still north of 15. We're rich. We're finally free. The room spun again, but this time it wasn't the concussion. I sat bolt upright, ignoring the sharp pain in my neck. You won? Which drawing? Last Wednesday's drawing, he crowed. Remember I bought that quick pick on a whim at the 7-Eleven near the gym? I almost forgot to check the numbers. I was checking the old stash of receipts this morning, and there it was. I checked the numbers online, and bam! Millionaire status, baby. He grabbed my hand, gripping it tightly. No more cheap wine, Sarah. No more living paycheck to paycheck. We can buy that lakeside cabin. We can pay off Mom's mortgage. We can finally breathe. He was crying happy tears. I stared at the man I married, the man who had just seen my car crash as a budgeting issue, now basking in unimaginable wealth derived from his weekly ritual. It was everything we had ever dreamed of, and suddenly it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. That's incredible, Kevin, I managed, pulling my hand back gently. Congratulations, really. He beamed, completely missing the hollowness in my voice. We're going to hire the best lawyers. We're going to set up trusts. We're going to celebrate tonight. I already called Marcus. He's coming over with champagne. He leaned down, his excitement palpable. Listen, I've already talked to Jerry. We need to move fast. I'm claiming the lump sum and we're getting divorced. The word hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. I blinked slowly. Divorced? Kevin, what are you talking about? We just found out we're rich. Exactly, he exclaimed, wiping a tear. I realized it this morning, Sarah. Winning this much money, it changes everything. I need to be free to enjoy this without the baggage. You've been wonderful, truly, but you're a tether. You're the woman who worries about the $5 late fee on the electricity bill. I need someone who understands the vision, the lifestyle. Jerry's already drafting the papers. It'll be amicable. You get a very generous settlement, enough to live comfortably, maybe even buy a nice condo. But I need a clean slate to enjoy this freedom. He patted my leg one last time, a gesture of final, condescending generosity. Don't worry about the details. Jerry will call you next week when you're discharged. Consider this your golden parachute. He was gone before I could formulate a coherent sentence. The silence he left behind was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. $27 million. And he was leaving me. The woman who had subsidized his dreams for a decade, with a severance package. I laid back against the pillows, the throbbing in my head returning with a vengeance. My first instinct was pure, blinding fury. I wanted to scream, to grab the IV stand and smash every window in this sterile room. I wanted to drag him back in here and demand he tear up those legal documents before Jerry even saw them. Then, the calculating part of my brain, the part honed by years of carefully balancing overdraft fees, kicked in. Divorce. He wanted a clean slate. He wanted me gone before the ink was dry on his winnings. He thought I was broke, that my near-death experience had only confirmed my status as a financial burden. I closed my eyes again, remembering the crinkled, flimsy ticket stuffed into the secret, zipped compartment inside my worn leather purse, hidden beneath my spare reading glasses. I had bought that ticket that same morning, right before the accident, at the little bodega near the pharmacy. I hadn't played the usual numbers. I had played the numbers from my grandmother's birthday, a set I hadn't used in years. I checked them last night, while Kevin was out celebrating his supposed win with Marcus, using the hospital Wi-Fi after convincing a nurse I needed to check on my cat. And just like Kevin, I hadn't told a soul. I pulled the heavy velvet cord for the nurse call button, my heart hammering a rhythm entirely different from the monitor's steady drone. I needed my purse. I needed to see those numbers one more time. I needed to know exactly what I was holding while my soon-to-be ex-husband was busy planning his future with some younger, vision-aligned woman. The nurse walked in, efficient and unimpressed. "Yes, dear? More pain meds?" "No," I said, my voice steady now, imbued with a cold, crystalline clarity I hadn't known I possessed. "I need my purse brought to me immediately. It's in the locker downstairs, room 304. The nurse hesitated. "Hospital policy. We usually hold personal items." Please, I insisted, pushing myself up slightly higher. It's critically important. I need to confirm something in the paperwork before I sign anything. If you bring that purse to me right now, I'll make sure you get a very generous thank you note, maybe even a little something extra from the settlement. The nurse's eyes flickered toward the door, assessing the risk versus reward. Just a moment, she mumbled, already turning away. As soon as she left, I reached under my thin blanket and braced my feet against the bed frame. I had to see the ticket. I had to know if I was planning my revenge based on a delusion or if I was about to change my life in a way Kevin could never possibly comprehend. I needed confirmation that his $27 million win was about to be overshadowed by something far more significant, something that would render his divorce papers obsolete. I pulled myself up to a sitting position, ignoring the searing protest from my spine, and looked toward the door, waiting for the nurse to return with my purse and my secret. But instead of the nurse, the door opened slowly, revealing Kevin again, standing in the hallway, no longer exuberant but pale and rigid. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood a man in a sharply tailored dark suit, clutching a leather briefcase, and the look on Kevin's face was pure, unadulterated terror. Kevin's carefully constructed facade of triumphant wealth had evaporated, replaced by a mask of sheer panic. His eyes, wide and bloodshot, were fixed not on me, but on the man looming behind him, a man whose presence in a hospital room late at night was never a good sign. This man looked like he belonged in a courtroom, or, perhaps, standing over a freshly dug hole. "Sarah," Kevin stammered, stepping awkwardly into the room, attempting to block the view of the suited stranger. "Don't worry about anything. I just need to discuss some private matters with a lawyer first. Get some rest." The suited man, however, took a deliberate step past Kevin, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor. He was tall, lean, and possessed the kind of indifferent menace that suggested he charged by the hour and valued silence above all else. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. His gaze swept over the room, settling finally on me. "Mrs. Miller?" His voice was a low rumble, devoid of warmth. "I am Mr. Thorne. I represent the interests of the Powerball Consortium, and unfortunately we have a problem with Mr. Miller's recent claim." Kevin let out a strangled sound that was half gasp, half whimper. "It's fine, Thorne. It's just paperwork. I told you Jerry's handling the initial filing. We just need the disbursement scheduled." Mr. Thorne ignored Kevin entirely, focusing solely on me. "Mr. Miller has claimed the winning ticket for the July 14th drawing, a lump sum of $22 million after federal withholding. However, we have identified a critical discrepancy in the claim process." My heart hammered against my ribs. Discrepancy. That one word sounded more threatening than the car crash itself. Had Kevin messed up the paperwork so badly that he'd voided the entire win? If so, his divorce announcement suddenly seemed like a cruel, baseless joke. "What kind of discrepancy?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, fueled now by a mixture of curiosity and the dark satisfaction of seeing Kevin sweat genuine fear for the first time in our marriage. Mr. Thorne opened his briefcase with a sharp click. He didn't pull out legal documents, but a thick, glossy photograph. He placed it carefully on the bedside table, right next to the plastic pitcher of ice water. It was a high-resolution image of a convenience store security camera feed. The grainy snapshot showed a hand I instantly recognized as Kevin's, slapping a lottery ticket onto the counter in front of a clerk. Next to the hand, perfectly visible, was a small laminated sign taped next to the scratch-off display. Cash/credit only, no checks. "Mr. Miller paid for this ticket," Thorne stated flatly, tapping the photo with a manicured finger, "using a personal check dated the following day, a check that, according to the bank records we were required to review before releasing funds, bounced this morning." Kevin visibly deflated, looking as though he'd aged 10 years in the span of 30 seconds. "It was an oversight. I just moved the money yesterday afternoon, Thorne. I transferred the funds from the brokerage account." "The brokerage account you liquidated 3 days ago," Thorne interrupted, his tone chillingly precise. The account we noted contained insufficient funds to cover the expected transfer window, especially considering the last deposit was a bounced check from your previous venture. My mind raced, trying to fit this new puzzle piece into the picture. Kevin had gambled again, perhaps even more desperately than usual, believing the upcoming Powerball money was guaranteed. He tried to pay for a winning ticket with a check he knew would bounce, betting the win would cover the immediate overdraft. So, the ticket is void? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Thorne shook his head slowly. Not voided, simply unclaimed in a timely manner by the original purchaser, as the transaction was invalid at the time of purchase. The ticket is currently in escrow, pending a proper adjudication process regarding payment for goods received. This was my opening. The hospital policy be damned. I needed my purse, and I needed to verify my own numbers. If Kevin's multi-million-dollar win was tied up in a legal nightmare involving a bounced check, it meant he wouldn't be able to file the divorce settlement paperwork Jerry was preparing. Not for weeks, maybe months. Mr. Thorne, I interjected, leaning forward despite the pain. If the ticket is currently in escrow, then the claim is pending. That means it hasn't been officially paid out, correct? Precisely, Mrs. Miller. We must ensure the rightful owner has the means to satisfy the initial purchase requirement, or the state may seize the prize pending litigation. And who determines the rightful owner? I pressed. Thorne gave me a long, assessing look, finally acknowledging my presence as something other than background noise. The individual whose name is on the claim form, assuming they can rectify the payment issue. Kevin lunged toward Thorne, desperation making him clumsy. I'll call Jerry. He'll wire the funds now. I can cover the check, Thorne. Just give me until tomorrow morning. It's too late for tomorrow morning, Mr. Miller, Thorne said, sidestepping Kevin with practiced ease. The state mandated a 24-hour window from the time the bounced check was flagged for initial review. That window closed an hour ago. In the absence of immediate remediation, the next step is to look for any concurrent, properly validated claims that might supersede the primary buyer's procedural error. My stomach dropped. Concurrent claims. My own secret ticket. And what happens if there is a concurrent claim? I asked, trying to sound like a concerned wife gathering information for her husband, not a predator circling her prey. Mr. Thorne finally smiled, a thin, predatory expression. If there is another individual who purchased a ticket for the exact same drawing date, and that ticket was purchased using a verifiable non-bounced payment method, say cash, and they arrive with the physical ticket before the state officially re-releases the prize pool for re-auction, that individual takes precedence. It's rare, but it happens. It's called procedural forfeiture. He looked directly at me, his eyes sharp. We are here to advise Mr. Miller of the precariousness of his situation. He effectively has no winnings yet. He has a legal mess. If you have any relevant information regarding other tickets purchased that day, Mrs. Miller, now would be the time to disclose it. The irony was suffocating. Kevin had just finalized the divorce based on a win that was currently vaporizing, and I, the discarded baggage, was holding the actual, legitimate claim in my possession. If I told him now, he'd snatch the ticket, try to bribe Thorne, and we'd be back where we started, fighting over his debt. I needed the nurse back with my purse. I needed proof. I needed to see my numbers line up with the winning draw before I risked showing my hand to Thorne and Kevin, both of whom looked ready to devour me whole. I don't know anything about other tickets, I lied smoothly, forcing a look of mild distress. Kevin manages all the gambling purchases. I've been too ill to focus on finances. Kevin seized on my perceived weakness. See, Thorne, she knows nothing. She's medicated. I'm the only claimant. Just tell me what I need to wire to clear the check. Thorne sighed, tapping the briefcase impatiently. We need the ticket, Mr. Miller, the physical evidence that proves you actually hold the winning numbers. It's in my wallet at home, Kevin insisted, sounding desperate. And you're confined here, Thorne noted dryly, which brings us back to your wife. He fixed his gaze on me again. Mrs. Miller, I strongly advise you to assist your husband. If that ticket is lost or invalidated due to his negligence, the state keeps the entirety of the jackpot. You stand to gain nothing from that outcome either. The door finally swung open. The nurse was back, looking flustered. She was not holding my purse. Instead, she was holding a small, thin plastic evidence bag, the kind used to secure bodily samples or small items seized during an investigation. "Excuse me," the nurse whispered urgently, looking only at Kevin. "Mr. Miller, when you were admitted, security tagged all loose items found in the vehicle. We just finished logging them. I found this in the glove compartment." She held out the evidence bag. Inside, sealed and clearly visible, was the exact winning lottery ticket, the one Kevin thought he bought with the check. Kevin's eyes went wide with relief. He lunged for it, but Mr. Thorne was faster, slamming his briefcase down on the table, blocking Kevin's reach and trapping the evidence bag between the case and the water pitcher. "Ah," Thorne breathed, a genuine flicker of interest in his eyes. "So, the ticket is here. This complicates things, Mr. Miller. This suggests you possessed the physical ticket before the payment discrepancy was flagged. This makes your case much stronger, provided we can prove you purchased it legally." "I bought it!" Kevin yelled, frustration boiling over. "We need to see the validated claim receipt that matches the transaction date," Thorne countered. "The check alone proves nothing." I watched them fight over the tangible proof of Kevin's conditional, fraud-adjacent win. My own ticket, the real one, was still waiting in my purse, down in the locker. I had seconds before the nurse either brought my bag or before Thorne decided to seize Kevin's ticket as part of the ongoing dispute. I looked pointedly at the nurse, then back at the fray. "Nurse," I said, my voice dangerously soft, "I need my purse now. If you don't bring it up immediately, I will file a formal complaint against this facility for withholding my personal property while I am under sedation." The nurse's eyes darted between the panicked husband, the menacing lawyer, and me. She clearly felt the room was about to explode. She nodded stiffly. "I'll be right back." She turned and hurried out. Kevin, distracted by his impending doom, didn't notice her exit. Thorne, however, did. His focus shifted subtly toward the doorway, a flicker of professional caution crossing his face. "Mr. Miller," Thorne warned, placing a proprietary hand on the briefcase covering the ticket. "We need to discuss your statement regarding liquidating assets before claiming—" The door swung open again. This time the nurse wasn't alone. She was flanked by two large men in identical, slightly too tight blue scrubs, hospital security guards, and tucked securely under the nurse's arm was my favorite worn leather purse. The nurse rushed to my bedside, thrusting the purse toward me. "Here you go, ma'am. I am so sorry for the delay." I grabbed the strap, my fingers immediately finding the internal zipper compartment. As I pulled out the crinkled, fragile lottery ticket, the one bought with crisp, clean, undeniable cash, I saw Kevin and Thorne both snap their heads toward me, their argument instantly forgotten, their faces freezing mid-expression as they registered the identical slip of paper I was now holding. Kevin's jaw dropped. What is that?" he whispered, the realization dawning on him like a cold, horrible sunrise. I unfolded the ticket slowly, deliberately, letting the silence build while the two security guards now awkwardly positioned themselves between the escalating conflict zones. I held the ticket up so the overhead light caught the printed numbers, and then I looked straight at Kevin, a genuine, terrifying smile spreading across my face. "This, Kevin," I said, my voice perfectly clear, "is the ticket I bought while you were celebrating your check bouncing. This one is for the exact same drawing." The air in the room instantly solidified. Kevin, whose brief moment of financial reprieve had been built on a foundation of hot air and bad checks, stared at the slip of paper in my hand as if I had just produced a venomous serpent. Mr. Thorne, the shark who had been circling Kevin's sinking vessel, didn't move, but his eyes narrowed, calculating the sudden seismic shift in power dynamics. That's impossible," Kevin choked out, his voice cracking with disbelief and sheer panic. "I checked the numbers. My numbers were—" "Your numbers were probably close," I interrupted sweetly, smoothing the ticket against the sheet. "Mine, however, are the actual winners, Kevin. I purchased mine at the Express Mart on Route 12, paid for in cash, precisely 30 minutes before I was hit by that pizza delivery boy." Thorne finally moved. He didn't reach for my ticket. Instead, he executed a swift, almost imperceptible pivot, placing himself slightly more between Kevin and me. He was analyzing the situation, assessing which party offered the cleaner legal pathway to the $22 million. Mrs. Miller, Thorne addressed me, his tone shifting from cautionary to intensely focused. Do you possess the validated receipt for this purchase? I do, I confirmed, already feeling for the folded receipt tucked into the same hidden compartment as the ticket. It's right here, printed on thermal paper, dated 11:47 a.m., cash transaction. Kevin lunged forward again, propelled by pure avarice, trying to grab the ticket from my grasp. Give me that. You can't claim it. It was my routine. You were just imitating me. The two security guards, sensing the situation escalating beyond verbal sparring, moved to intervene. One guard gently placed a large hand on Kevin's chest, steadying him. Sir, you need to calm down, the guard warned. Don't touch me, Kevin roared, shoving the guard's hand away with surprising force. That's my money. I'm claiming divorce. She gets nothing. Thorne held up a hand, silencing Kevin with an authority that transcended his role as a lawyer. Mr. Miller, restraint. You are currently under advisement regarding potential financial fraud and attempted claim manipulation. Mrs. Miller, if your documentation is in order, you have indeed fulfilled the requirements for procedural forfeiture. He turned to Kevin, his voice dropping to a lethal monotone. Mr. Miller, your reliance on an invalid payment method means your claim is stalled indefinitely pending investigation into intent. Mrs. Miller's claim, properly documented and paid for with untainted currency, takes immediate priority. The room was silent except for the beeping of my machine and the ragged sound of Kevin's breathing. He was ruined. Not only had his winning ticket just been usurped, but the evidence of his fraudulent intent, the bounced check, was now in the hands of a consortium lawyer who clearly held all the cards. Divorce, Kevin managed to spit out, his eyes blazing with hatred directed solely at me. You smug little viper. You let me do all this. You let me announce the divorce. You let me walk out that door believing I was rich, just so you could pull this stunt? You walked out that door believing you were free, Kevin. I corrected him softly, finally allowing a genuine cold smile to touch my lips. I simply waited until the paperwork was filed and the terms were established. Why waste time arguing over a settlement when I can just claim the entire pot myself? I held the ticket and receipt tightly. I was no longer Sarah, the long-suffering wife. I was the victor of a silent, decade-long war. Thorne looked between us, a flicker of professional admiration and perhaps slight apprehension in his eyes. He reached into his briefcase again, pulling out a fresh, crisp document. Mrs. Miller, he said, offering the paper to me, given the immediate precedence of your claim, the Powerball Consortium requires you to sign an affidavit confirming sole ownership and intent to pursue the full amount. This will immediately invalidate Mr. Miller's pending claim, as he can no longer prove original purchase rights through legitimate means. I reached for the pen he offered, but before my fingers touched the cool metal casing, the door burst open violently. It wasn't the nurse this time. It was Jerry, Kevin's CPA brother-in-law, looking disheveled and sweating profusely, breathing hard as if he'd run the entire length of the hospital. "Kevin, thank God I found you!" Jerry gasped, stumbling into the room, completely ignoring Thorne and me. The check bounced. The $27 million claim is dead. I tried to cover the transfer, but the bank flagged the source accounts. They traced the recent activity back to the initial seed money for that offshore consulting firm you started last month. Kevin's face, already ashen, turned a sickening shade of gray. "What are you talking about, Jerry? That account was supposed to be clean." "It wasn't clean, Kevin. It was fronted," Jerry cried, waving his hands wildly. "The SEC just put a hold on the entire fund distribution. They're freezing all assets connected to the—" Jerry stopped dead when he finally registered the tension in the room, the presence of the ominous lawyer and the two security guards. His eyes landed on the lottery ticket in my hand. "Wait," Jerry whispered, his voice laced with sudden dread. "That's the drawing." That's the winning ticket. Thorne stepped forward, abandoning the affidavit for a moment to address the new threat. Who are you, sir? This room is under advisement from legal counsel regarding active litigation. Jerry ignored him, looking only at Kevin with horrified accusation. Kevin, you told me you didn't buy a ticket for that drawing. You told me you only had scratch-offs. If she has the winning ticket and your main claim is frozen by the SEC because of that offshore mess, this is all we have left. Kevin spun around, his eyes wild, no longer caring about the divorce or the money, only the immediate legal jeopardy. Shut up, Jerry, just shut up. Sarah, listen to me. Forget the divorce. We can fix this together. If we pool our money, your cash winnings, whatever's left of the offshore assets, we can pay off the SEC hold. We can fight this. We're still married on paper until those papers are signed. Please, Sarah, don't throw us both in jail. He lunged for my hand, no longer attempting to snatch the ticket, but reaching for me, pleading, a desperate, pathetic grab for a partnership he had just tried to discard. I pulled my hand back instinctively, clutching the ticket and the pen Thorne offered. I looked from Kevin's terrified, ruined face to Jerry's panicked expression, and finally at Mr. Thorne, the gatekeeper to my freedom. It's too late for pooling assets, Kevin, I said, my voice ringing with finality. I signed the affidavit with a firm, steady hand, the scratch of the pen loud in the tense silence. As I handed the signed document back to Thorne, who tucked it securely into his briefcase beside Kevin's invalid ticket, Kevin made one final, desperate move. He ignored the security guards entirely, bypassed Thorne, and scrambled onto the hospital bed, grabbing my ankle with both hands. Sarah, don't sign that. You don't understand. If the SEC seizes those accounts, they'll trace the initial investment. They'll find out that the only legitimate seed money I had for the consulting firm came from the savings account you thought was paying for my gambling habit. If they trace that money back, they'll find the withdrawal slips. They'll see you signed for them. You signed the papers for me. You'll go down for fraud, too. You'll go to prison with me. The grip on my ankle was shockingly strong, a desperate anchor thrown out by a drowning man. Kevin's face, inches from my knee, was contorted with a terror that finally seemed genuine. Not fear of losing money, but fear of losing everything, including me as his unwilling accomplice. You signed the withdrawal slips, Sarah, he hissed, his breath ragged against my skin. You authorized the transfer from the joint account to fund the initial consultancy shell company. I told you it was for a business investment. If they connect that seed money to the SEC freeze, they'll look for co-conspirators. You're listed as the authorized signatory on the wire transfer authorizations. You'll be charged. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the breath I had just regained from the euphoria of my own victory. I remembered the flurry of paperwork during the early days of Kevin's consulting firm, a stack of documents he'd thrust at me on a busy Saturday morning, asking me to just sign here and here so he could finalize the incorporation documents. I'd signed, trusting him, wanting only to get back to organizing the house. I looked down at him, sprawled across my hospital bed, his frantic grip a disgusting violation of my bruised body. The two security guards witnessing the physical assault and the escalating drama involving lawyers, SEC threats, and now potential conspiracy charges, were finally moving in earnest. Sir, you must release the patient immediately, the first guard ordered, grabbing Kevin's shoulders and attempting to pull him upright. Kevin resisted violently, his voice rising to a panicked shriek. No, she has to listen. Sarah, if I go down, you go down. We're linked. You can't walk away clean. You can't take that money and leave me to the SEC. Mr. Thorne, ever the pragmatist, stepped around the fray, his composure unwavering. He was already tapping rapidly on his phone, presumably dialing his own firm's white-collar crime division. Jerry, you need to detail exactly what those funds were for and when Mrs. Miller signed the authorizations. This changes the landscape entirely. Jerry, looking completely overwhelmed by the sudden federal interest in his brother-in-law's shady dealings, could only nod mutely. I reached down and gently pried Kevin's fingers off my ankle. The gesture was not one of mercy, but control. Once his grip loosened, I leaned forward and spoke directly into his ear, my voice chillingly calm, utterly devoid of emotion. "You are right, Kevin. I signed those documents. I didn't know what they were for, but I signed them. And for 10 years, I have covered every lie, every debt, every failed scheme with my silence and my earnings." I slowly lifted the lottery ticket, the legitimate one, the one that now represented my escape, and held it up between us. "You thought I was your financial anchor, the boring wife who handled the bills," I continued, my eyes locked on his. "You thought you could divorce me cleanly because you assumed I was broke and desperate, and that any evidence of your fraud would sink me along with you." I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle. "But you forgot one thing, Kevin. I am not just the signatory on those transfer forms. I'm the person who reconciles the accounts." I then looked at Thorne, who was listening intently. His phone call momentarily paused. "Mr. Thorne, before I was married, I worked in corporate auditing for 3 years. I resigned to take care of Kevin's messes. Those withdrawal slips Kevin mentioned, I didn't just sign them. I retained copies of every single one of them, indexed and cross-referenced with my personal digital records. I have those copies stored securely off-site, dated before the SEC investigation was even announced." A profound silence descended. Kevin's face went slack, his desperation replaced by stark, naked horror. He knew my organizational compulsion better than anyone. He knew I kept meticulous records of everything, even if I didn't understand the context at the time. You kept copies?" Kevin whispered, his voice barely audible. "Of course," I replied, tossing the winning lottery ticket onto the now-abandoned affidavit Thorne had presented me with. "When you think you're marrying a fool, Kevin, you forget that a good bookkeeper always keeps her own ledger." Thorne straightened up, finally recognizing the dynamic. He wasn't dealing with a hysterical, desperate wife anymore. He was dealing with a woman who held both the legitimate winning ticket and the evidence needed to bury her estranged husband in federal prison. "Mrs. Miller," Thorne said, his voice now laced with a profound respect that bordered on fear. "In light of this new information, perhaps we should discuss a complete restructuring of the terms of adjudication. If you are willing to share the evidence regarding the fraudulent seed money with the consortium's legal team, and only the consortium's legal team, we can expedite the payout of your claim and potentially offer you immunity regarding any minor procedural oversight you may have committed unknowingly." He was offering me a clean slate and a massive fortune, provided I gave them Kevin on a silver platter. I met Thorne's gaze and nodded once. "I agree to the terms, Mr. Thorne. You get the evidence that stops his claim, and I get the full payout immediately. No lawyers for the divorce. He gets nothing but the hospital gown he's wearing." Kevin was hyperventilating, clawing weakly at the sheets. "No, Sarah, you can't. We're married. You'll be implicated. You signed for the money. They'll take everything." I leaned over him one last time, the victory tasting sweeter than any champagne. "They won't take anything, Kevin, because I already took everything that mattered." I turned my attention back to Thorne, reaching for the pen again, ready to finalize the deal that would make me a multi-millionaire and leave him to face the SEC alone. But just as I raised the pen to the affidavit, the PA system crackled to life, startling everyone in the room. It was the main hospital operator, her voice echoing through the speakers, grave and official. "Attention, all personnel. We have an urgent notification from local law enforcement. A perimeter lockdown has been initiated on the main floor exits. All non-emergency visitor movement has been suspended due to an active investigation." Thorne froze, his hand hovering over the paperwork. Kevin lifted his head, a strange, dawning confusion replacing his terror. "Investigation?" Thorne asked the operator, his voice sharp. "What investigation?" The operator's voice returned, chillingly calm. "We have received a report regarding an individual attempting to flee jurisdiction via an unauthorized exit route shortly after 4 p.m. The suspect matches the description of Mr. Kevin Miller, who is currently being sought by federal agents concerning active warrants related to securities fraud and money laundering. Kevin looked wildly at the door, then back at me, his mouth opening and closing uselessly. The security guards, realizing they were dealing with more than a domestic disturbance, subtly shifted their stance, effectively forming a tight circle around Kevin and the lawyer, effectively trapping all of us. Before Thorne could react, before I could sign my name to freedom, the heavy double doors of the hospital room burst open again, revealing not more lawyers, but two stern-faced FBI agents in crisp, dark suits, badges prominently displayed. The lead agent's eyes scanned the room once, dismissing Thorne, ignoring Jerry, and locking directly onto Kevin Miller, still half sitting on my hospital bed. "Kevin Miller," the agent demanded, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "You are under arrest pursuant to a federal indictment issued this afternoon." He then looked pointedly at me, holding the winning lottery ticket in my grasp. "And you, madam, do not move. We need to secure all evidence related to the claimant's assets immediately." The entrance of the FBI agents shattered the fragile ecosystem of panic and greed that had defined the last 10 minutes. The air, thick with the scent of antiseptic and desperation, now carried the metallic tang of impending federal jurisdiction. Kevin's remaining hope evaporated instantly. He didn't fight the agents. He simply collapsed back onto the crisp white sheets, a man utterly broken, his face a picture of stunned resignation. The realization that he hadn't just lost his wife or his money, but his freedom entirely, rendered him immobile. "Don't move," the lead agent repeated, his voice firm, addressing me with the same caution he'd used for Kevin. He looked at Thorne, who was already holding his hands up in a gesture of professional deference. "Mr. Thorne, we are aware of the Powerball Consortium's interest in the matter. We will be seizing both tickets, the one purportedly purchased with invalid funds and the one Mrs. Miller claims as legitimately purchased, as evidence in the ongoing investigation into Mr. Miller's financial activities." Thorne nodded curtly. "Understood, Agent. We are cooperating fully. Mrs. Miller was just about to sign an affidavit confirming her claim and providing documentation regarding Mr. Miller's fraudulent seed money." My grip tightened on the pen. This was the precipice. If the agent seized my ticket now, it would vanish into the bureaucratic abyss of federal evidence processing, potentially delaying my payout for months, perhaps years, while they built their case against Kevin. And worse, they would scrutinize the source of my funds, the cash I used to buy the ticket. "Agent," I cut in, my voice cutting through the tension with surprising authority. I held up the signed affidavit and the winning ticket, keeping them clearly visible. "This ticket is my property. It was purchased with legitimate documented cash funds, completely separate from any assets involved in Mr. Miller's alleged fraud. I didn't give him time to question the cash. I handed the signed affidavit to Thorne, securing my agreement with the consortium first. "Mr. Thorne, that documentation is complete, as agreed. You have my full statement regarding the offshore accounts." Thorne took the signed paper, his expression finally relaxing into satisfaction. "Excellent, Mrs. Miller. Your claim is now prioritized. We will instruct the State Lottery Commission to release the funds into your segregated account within 48 hours, provided the initial cash purchase can be verified through your bank records, which I trust are as clean as your affidavit suggests." With the consortium secured, I turned my full attention to the lead FBI agent. I held out my legitimate ticket, but instead of handing it over, I offered the accompanying receipt. "Agent," I said, adopting the precise formal tone I used when explaining a complex ledger discrepancy to a difficult client, "I am providing you with the purchase receipt for this winning ticket, dated 11:47 a.m., cash transaction. This ticket is legally mine. However, I also have a complete indexed record of every single fraudulent transaction Mr. Miller conducted using my signature authorization over the last 2 years. I gestured toward the two security guards, who were now standing guard over the thoroughly defeated Kevin. I was about to sign an agreement confirming my willingness to testify against my husband regarding the use of our joint account to seed his illegal consulting firm. If you seize this winning ticket now, you delay my testimony and complicate the forfeiture of those accounts. If you allow me to be discharged with my ticket secured, I will personally present you with the full, cross-referenced audit files within 6 hours. The agent weighed the options. A potential co-conspirator who was suddenly willing to turn state's evidence, or a seized piece of evidence that might take months to process. He looked at Kevin, now being loosely escorted toward the door by the second agent. "Mr. Miller, you're coming with us." As Kevin was pulled off the bed, he turned back one last time, his eyes pleading, a final desperate attempt to drag me down with him. "Sarah, don't. They'll never let you keep it all. They'll tie you up in the investigation. You'll lose it." I looked at him, a profound sense of liberation washing over me. I watched the FBI agents guide my soon-to-be ex-husband toward the door, past the bewildered Jerry. "They won't take it, Kevin," I stated, my voice calm and absolute. "Because, unlike you, I didn't just sign the papers. I read them." The agent nodded to me. "Mrs. Miller, we'll be in touch regarding those files. Do not leave the jurisdiction." "I wouldn't dream of it," I replied, offering a slight, respectful nod to the FBI presence. The door clicked shut behind the agents and Kevin, leaving only Jerry, Thorne, the nurse, and the 2 security guards in the room. Thorne gave a satisfied, businesslike nod and excused himself to follow up on the consortium's claim priority. Jerry, realizing the full scope of his brother-in-law's implosion, mumbled an apology and shuffled out, utterly defeated. The nurse and the remaining guards stood awkwardly near the door. I carefully folded my legitimate winning ticket and tucked it safely into the breast pocket of my hospital gown, directly over my heart. I looked down at the empty space where Kevin had been, feeling only a faint echo of exhaustion, not sadness. I then reached for the call button again. "Nurse," I said, my voice soft but carrying absolute authority now. "I need my discharge papers processed immediately, and call me a car, a nice one. I need to stop at the bank on my way home." As the nurse scurried to comply, I leaned back against the pillows, no longer feeling the concussion's dull throb, but the sharp, thrilling pressure of $22 million resting against my chest. The divorce was finalized not by Kevin's decree, but by federal indictment, and I was walking away not with a meager settlement, but with a clean slate and a fortune won fair and square, a fortune built on the one thing Kevin never respected, meticulous record-keeping. I closed my eyes, no longer needing to pretend to sleep. For the first time in a decade, I didn't have to worry about next month's bills. I only had to worry about which yacht broker to call first.